Everybody. Welcome to Café on Tampa Online. I'm here with I'm Bill Carlson, here with my co-host Del Acosta, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Good morning, everyone. We're happy to see you here this Friday morning. Today, we have a very special program. We have Tampa author Ersula Odom. She's written a number of books. Her most recent is the Arcadia publication, African American History and Tampa's History. Ms. Odom, give us a little bit of information about your background and interest in Tampa's history.
Good morning. Well, it started with my having a love for old photographs and stories because I grew up with my grandmother in the backwoods of Georgia. And so that is where it started. But there was something, excuse me, that was under her bed that was a box of photographs, and it was called Have a Tampa. And I had no idea what that was. And I eventually ended up in college in St. Petersburg and then here in Tampa, where I raised a family and started a business and had a career. I brought that back into play at my college reunion, where I realized I had scrapbooks and journals and things like that. And I started writing a book, and therein lies how it all started. And this latest book that you mentioned, African Americans of Tampa, came about because I was contacted by Arcadia Publishing. They wanted me to write a book about something else, and I went researching for photographs and stories and what have you, and they were just scarce. And I said, no, this is not going to work. And then we started brainstorming, and then we talked about African Americans of Tampa, and I said, that's it. That's what I want to do. So I looked through 15,000 photographs at the Tampa library, downtown library, and then went from house to house to ask people if they knew the people in the photographs, because I had had an experience where a book in a town that I was interested in only said African American male, African American woman, but they didn't tell who that person was or gave that person any real life. So I wanted to do something different. So that is the basis of who I am. I can tell you, I have an eclectic background, worked for GTE Data Services for 20 years, managing documentation and training. So I have a love of the words and the stories that they tell.
Let me just plug your book real fast here, if everybody can see with the virtual background. Normally we meet in Oxford Exchange, but we haven't been able to for the last few months because of COVID-19. However, Ursula was nice enough to go by Oxford yesterday and signed, I think, 18 books. And so there's a limited supply. But if you go to the Oxford Exchange bookstore, go this morning and get one of her books. And she also has several other books. And I want to say she has been recommended by many, many people over the last year or two, and we're very lucky to have her. I want to thank Carrick Williams and the Saturday Morning Men's Group for finally putting us in touch with her, and we're very honored to have you this morning. If anybody has any questions, please post them underneath the feed, and we do this as a community service, so please hit the share button so that your friends and family can all see the live feed. Can you just tell us, start wherever you want at the beginning of Tampa's African American history, and then maybe bring us forward?
Well, since I collaborate with Carrick Williams, I'll start there. One of the things that I get the honor of doing is working with him to put together videos of legends in the city, and that has been a wonderful experience. Doris Ross Reddick, James A. Hammond, and Teresa Manuel. There are videos on my website where you can see them and their story, and they are Tampa's legends and put Tampa on the map in certain areas. So I'm excited about that. I also take the stories that I gather and the pictures that I gather and create legacy walls. And those are fascinating for me because I can put them in schools and buildings where people all day long, you can walk by that wall and have your story told all day to everyone, every time. And it's usually about the namesake of the school or the building and their story about the building and the people in that building before. And I like to tap into the future as well. Some people that are alive and are doing wonderful things. And we put that on the wall to inspire people as they go by. And we have one installed at Edison, at Booker T. Washington, and there's some in the works that I'm not at liberty to say at this moment, but there's some that are coming as well, and a couple of county buildings as well.
At the beginning of your talk today, you mentioned Have a Tampa. For our younger viewers out there, could you explain what Have a Tampa was?
Well, for a 5-year-old, it was just a box, but it was fascinating. It was a cigar box, and at that time, Have a Tampa cigar box were all over the country, and people were using them for so many different things, including storing photographs and letters. And my grandmother stored a lock of her sister's hair in there. It was just a treasure box. But we also used them in school to make pencil boxes and purses with macaroni, and we glued them to the boxes and what have you. So Have a Tampa boxes were dear to us.
Can you tell us the story on your background? It says Sula 2, and I know the answer because I watched the video last night, but can you tell us the story behind that?
Well, that happens to be my grandmother's name. Her name is Ersula, and I am named for her. And she liked the name Sula, or she was called Sula. So that's what we knew her as. So that makes me Sula 2, and that's how I named the company. She was a funny person. I totally loved my grandmother. I am totally blessed for having been raised by her. And to give you an idea of some of the things that she used to talk about, she would tell a joke. And one of the jokes was about this sinner in the community. Okay, now she was a religious person, but she told religious jokes too. And she said, this person decided one day that he was just going to give up all of the drinking and the lying and the cheating and the stealing and all of that, and just go to church and just change his life. And that particular day, the pastor was so good. The sermon was so good. The man decided to join the church. And he walked down that aisle and presented himself to the pastor. And all of a sudden, there was a loud noise, pow, and lightning ran down the sideboard and in front of the pulpit and struck the man dead. And God said, I had to get him while I had him. Now, church people look at me and go, what? So I have to tell, the moral of the story is not that you don't go to church and you don't join the church. It's that when you do, make sure that God knows that's not the last good thing you're gonna do. So those are the kinds of things that my grandmother did. And there's one more I would like to, since you brought her up, that I'd like to tell. And that's how I used to tell her how much I loved her. Because I did. I absolutely loved my grandmother. And so I would say, grandmother, I love you so much. I don't think I could stand it if you died before me. And she said, uh-huh. I said, grandma, I love you so much. I don't think I could stand it if you died before me. And she said, mm-hmm. And then finally one day I said, grandma, I love you. I love you so much. I don't think I could stand it if you died before me. And she said, if you really mean that, get on your knees and pray. God will hear you, and he's a good God. He will answer your prayer. I thought about that thing. She was 68 and I was 10. I said, uh-huh.
That's a beautiful story.
Now, the reason that I tell that is because it is a form of teaching without degrading. My grandmother knew that I was asking her the worst thing I could possibly ask a parent or a grandparent, and that is to precede their child in death. I mean, for the child to precede them in death. And so she had been there and done that before, and she wanted no parts of that. She had had that grief before. And so she could have said, girl, you so crazy. I mean, she could have just went off on me, but instead she made me think about that thing.
And you were raised by your grandmother, right?
Yes, I was.
And the research for your recent book on African Americans in Tampa, did you discover an unknown hero? And if you did, could you tell us about that person?
An unknown hero.
You identified people, yes.
Well, actually, what that particular question brings to mind is that, well, first of all, there were several in the book, but the moment that comes to mind is one of my friends. I asked her if she knew anybody in the book, and she looked in the book, and it was a picture of a 1954 group of young men. And she said, "I think that's my Uncle Frank." And she called her Uncle Frank. We went to his house and we spent about 2 hours laughing and joking. And he was on the phone calling people, "Man, this girl got a picture of when we would," and he gave me the names of everybody on that page and what they ultimately end up being. And my friend enjoyed what became the last time she ever saw him, because he passed away about 2 weeks later. So that was like a moment that is cherished because he was happy and he shared something that is shared with the world that would have been lost, totally lost.
Just so everybody knows, the book, I don't know if you can see it when I flip through the virtual thing blocks it, but it's full of pictures. So the great thing is you actually have brought the stories to life with the pictures. Any interesting anecdotes, any stories that most people don't know?
There's one in there that I love of Doris Ross Redding. And it's of her when she was a queen at Lomax Elementary School. And I was going through asking her to tell me people that she knew on the page too. And it's like a waterfall of beautiful little babies. And she started naming people and she got down to the bottom of the page and she said, "That's Fred Hearn's mama." Now, this was Fred Hearn's mother, a historian in the city, that she was only in first grade, if not younger. Now, you may, if any of us see our parents at that age among a whole bunch of other people, we may or may not be able to recognize them if we didn't know exactly which one that person was. So I was able to take that picture of Fred Hearns and say, "Hey, that's your mama." I love those moments. That's what I like to do. Now, when I think in terms of what's in the book itself and the places that I love, it's not necessarily a single person, but if you look at Building Tampa, there is a picture of a construction, and it's like 3 stories in the ground, and it happens to be Davis Island. Happens to be Davis Island, and they're putting together the drainage system for Davis Island. Well, it's like I said, it's a construction picture, but it is filled with African American men. And why is that important? Because those are the people that are unknown, unnamed, that actually help this city come to life. And the reason that I appreciate that is I was in Savannah, Georgia with my first cousin, and he was talking about his side of the family, his mother's side of the family. And he asked me to take a picture of him standing, balancing himself on a railroad track. And I thought this grown man with gray hair was being a little silly. So I said, "Why?" He said, "Because my granddaddy laid this track." He had no idea exactly what footage, what part that man actually touched. So he claimed the whole thing. And he had the right to do it because his grandfather was a part of that team, as are our ancestors are a part of teams that do incredible things. And so if you are one of those people that are holding that memory in your head, tell it to someone so they can benefit from it, so they can be proud of it, so they can know that they have that gene in their body. That's what this is all about. When I pull those pictures together, I want to create a link between a person's name, the things they did, and the people they can inspire. Because once you look at the book, once you read the book, there may be something that says, "Oh, I can do that. Oh, I didn't know that. That was my aunt's best friend. I didn't know what she looked like. That's why I do what I do.
Well, you're a great storyteller. Do you have any lectures coming up soon?
Well, last night I actually performed Mary McLeod Bethune as a virtual presentation, and that was interesting. I have a performance of Ida B. Wells that's going to be done on election day virtually. And it's for continuing education for attorneys, which is really rather interesting for me. They're going to compare what the laws were like during Ida B. Wells's time and today, and women's suffrage. So that should be an interesting experience for all of us.
Great. I want to ask you,
Yes.
do you know anything about the historically Black community in the Port Tampa area?
Well, only in that Teresa Manuel, one of the people that I mentioned that we did the video on, she was the first Black woman from Florida to participate in the Olympics in 1948. She was from that area. Now, I have not really researched that. I happened to go down in that area and take a lot of photographs, and a friend of mine was giving me a tour. There's incredible architecture in the buildings there, and I know that there were a lot of African Americans there because he delivered papers to them in that area. That is a story that still needs to be told.
Yeah, somebody needs to write a book on that. Just for anybody who's watching, people think that South Tampa is monolithic and being mostly white and mostly rich. And it's interesting, there are pockets of poverty in South Tampa, and also there are all different ethnicities. But the interesting thing, as I understand it, is at the tip next to McDill. That was the original port there, and also where the yacht club is. And there was a traditional African American community there a lot of them were longshoremen, and there were several churches. And one that I've been to many times is Port Tampa AME. It's a beautiful building and a great historical experience. And there are people with lots of stories that they can tell in there. Sorry, I'll go Dell. Next question.
Well, we were talking about communities. Another community that's in South Tampa that exists but fragmented is Dobyville. Are you familiar with Dobyville and its history?
Yeah, there's a couple of pictures in the book about Dobyville, and there are people around that still remember that. In fact, there's a picture in the book of a queen being crowned. It's like 4 or 5 young people, a king and a queen, and a lady that's crowning her. And I now know who that is. It's Deborah Larry, and she is an alumni of Blake. She's still around to tell the stories. So that brings to mind that things that are now gone, the memories are still there, and they still need to be captured and preserved. And it's all over. Like, people think that the things that we see, or no, the things that we hear about are ancient history. It's not. Because even I remember when desegregation happened, I was a part of it. I actually picked cotton at one point in time. This history is still walking among us. Dobyville, there are a lot of people walking around that memory is golden for them.
Anybody, by the way, anybody has that story, please tell us. It's part of or connected to Historic Hyde Park, which is the group that founded Café on Tampa. Want to ask you, between downtown Tampa and Ybor City, people who are new to Tampa often comment, hey, there's all this empty land. Why has nothing ever been developed there? And can you tell us a little bit about the history of Central Avenue and maybe anything about the Jackson House and all, what all was there and why it's not there anymore?
Okay. Well, Central Avenue has a following that's almost like religious, because that was the center of all things happening. It was called the Harlem of the South, meaning that entertainment took place there, and people came and went. They lived in that area. It was highly populated. And then urban renewal, I guess you would call it, came through and wiped it all out. And the only thing that's left that originally was there, Jackson House, and then there are two houses that appear to be from the original Scrubs area that are still there and still standing. Only evidence that that still exists or once exist. Now, that particular area that you're talking about too also holds a lot of other history as it relates to African Americans. So Jackson House is right across from the railroad track, from the train station. And so what that means is that it becomes highly credible that the stories that they tell in terms of who came, James Brown, Ray Charles, and all of the famous people of the time, because of desegregation, because of segregation, they had to, and Jim Crow laws, they had to go to some place that was owned by Black people because they couldn't go to hotels that were run by whites. So it is highly credible that those people got off that train, went straight across the street to the Jackson House. I'm totally convinced that happened. They have the evidence, but it's just so easy to see it if you look at it. But when I look through the pictures, there's no picture that would show the two together, or not that I found, even though they're right within the same frame of a photograph, or could be. But from the train station back to 7th Avenue, around in that area, that all used to be owned by African Americans as well. And one person that I am fascinated with is Dorcas Bryant. She owned 66 acres, and her son was one of the first people to be appointed in government in the area. They built churches. They were, she was a land speculator right out of slavery, and that was pretty awesome. And that brings up another person, Madam Fortune Taylor. I have a friend that is just totally absorbed with making sure her legacy comes to life and stays alive. You know, the Fortune Street Bridge, that is named for a Black woman. And Gloria Jean Royster is making sure that she find every bit of information about that particular person. There are, also you have the Tampa Park Plaza. That was a source of business, and the first Black bank in Tampa was in that location. You have a collaboration with the Longshoremen and C. Blythe Andrews, the Lilly White Association. Those two got together with the city and created affordable housing. So you had all of that working together. I mean, it was an area that is incredible. And now we have the Perry Harvey Park with all of that wonderful artwork that depicts what happened in Central Avenue. And I came all the way back around to your question. There's actually a tour of Central Avenue and the park that was created to honor Central Avenue. So you'll hear the history of what happened right after slavery in terms of churches, education, civil rights, and housing and living. That is all depicted.
Del, we're already out of time, so you ask the last question, and then we'll wrap.
Well, you mentioned the Lilly White Association, which is critical to the history of Tampa. Can you kind of briefly explain to our viewers what the Lilly White Association was? And I know there was a hospital, but there were other functions that occurred.
Yeah, they were a benefits organization in that they work with insurance, burial, health, housing. They were just trying to improve the lives of the community. And they also had a big parade that everybody talks about. The thing that is crucial for me too is that the person that was in charge of that was C. Blythe Andrews, and that family is responsible for the African American newspaper that we have today. And for that to be so important is because at one point Black people could not be found in a newspaper except if they killed somebody. And with the Florida Sentinel, that's the only place that a positive story or the story that can be used in our scrapbooks could be found. Our history is there. It arrives every week to tell the story of the African American community. And the C. Blythe Andrews Library now has the original copies as well as the University of South Florida, I believe.
Thank you so much. We could easily go on for several hours. You're just getting rolling on all your great stories. Could you, again, thank you so much for coming today. And
Thank you.
for anybody watching, please hit the share button and the like button so your friends and family can see it. Do you have any final thoughts? By the way, Gloria's watching, so say shout out to her.
Hi, Gloria.
Any final thoughts you want to tell us about your website and maybe mention your other books too? Don't forget, everybody, if you just tuned in, the African Americans in Tampa book, which will hopefully show up here, is available at Oxford Exchange Bookstore, where we usually meet downstairs. And she's signed 18 copies of it. So hurry over there and get one of the signed copies. Any other thing you want to mention? Your other books?
Yes. When I mentioned the Central Avenue, I should have said the Tampa Bay History Center, it sponsors that tour. So check out their website. You can actually take the tour via them. And you can go to my website, www.sulatoo.com, and find out all of the things that I've been talking about and then some. And I have one final thing. I have a YouTube channel that if you go to Sula space Too, Wisdom and Young Legend is something that I'm enjoying, where you take the old and the new and you put it together and you have a pretty awesome force of knowledge that can be shared. So take a look.
Can you just, above your head is the book about your grandmother. Can you just tell us 30 seconds on where you got the name of it and what it's about?
Well, on my birthday, I went to someone to help me figure out how to do that, how to write a book, because I had all these stories. And after telling the person about my grandmother, he said, well, what's her name? I said, Sula. And he said, well, the book should be called At Sula's Feet, because that's all you've been talking about, sitting at her feet.
Well, on that note, thank you so much. And we hope to have you back again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.